Good morning, and we thank you for joining us on this holiday weekend, July the 4th weekend. We are thankful that you've taken the time to listen and to join us in our online worship service. We have a regular service that we have every Sunday morning, same time at 10:15. On Sunday mornings, we would love to have you come if you live in our area. Join us, meet our people, and be a part of the in-person worship service of Unity Baptist Church. We are located at 404 South Duncan Road in Champaign, just south of Springfield Avenue on Duncan Road, kind of catty-cornered from Prairie Gardens. And we sit at the back of the Carpenters Union building here in Champaign. So come and join us and sing with us and pray with us and worship with us. Even today, you've got time to get over here and participate in the worship service with us today. As I said at the beginning, this is July the 4th weekend, a holiday weekend here in the United States. And tomorrow we're going to be celebrating the 246th anniversary of our nation's Declaration of Independence from Great Britain. And I want to talk to you today for just a few minutes, a little unusual presentation in the message today, but I want to talk to you about the blessed nation. It says in the book of Psalm chapter 33 and verse number 12, "Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord." And that's the premise of what I want to talk about today. When you consider the fact that all the great empires and kingdoms in the history of the world have lasted about 250 years. Some have lasted a little longer than that. Some have lasted a little less than that. But when you stop and consider the fact that a kingdom, an empire, a great nation, rises to its pinnacle and stays there for about 250 years, and that the United States of America is sitting today at 246 years, then I think that when you consider that in light of the present condition of our country in the last 50 years, it ought to give you pause. It ought to make us think about the future. So we're celebrating this weekend the signing of the Declaration of Independence. This document that was written primarily by Thomas Jefferson. It was edited by Benjamin Franklin and John Adams, a couple of other of our patriot fathers. It was edited, I understand, much to the chagrin of Thomas Jefferson. He didn't appreciate some of the editing that was done. But what it did was that it laid out the tenets of our separation from England. It talks about the reason it was necessary and the determination of those calling for it to see this through. We want to be a free and independent nation from Great Britain. We don't want them telling us what to do. We are a nation in our own right. And the preamble to this founding document lays out the high ideals that our founding fathers had as they formed this new nation, that which we were going to aspire to, and that ultimately they were hopeful we would achieve. They understood this was not a perfect document. They understood that we were not a perfect nation, that as we grew and things changed, that we were going to have to adjust. And they made provision for that in the Constitution of the United States. But I want to read for you a portion of this document, basically the preamble to the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson wrote, "When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of those ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness." After this, the writers and signers listed at least 30 different grievances that they had against Great Britain that brought about this desire for them to dissolve this relationship and become an independent government. It was particularly directed at King George III. And at the end of that, when they made their statement, when they explained their reasons, they concluded their document by saying, "We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these United colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do." And then they finally conclude by saying this, "And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor." This declaration was approved by the delegates on July the 2nd, 1776, and on July the 4th, it was presented. Only two men actually signed the document on July 4th, John Hancock, who was the president of the Second Continental Congress, and also Charles Thomson, the secretary of the Second Continental Congress. The majority of the delegates had signed their names by August the 2nd of 1776. And finally, in January of 1777, Thomas McCain signed, becoming the last delegate to make the commitment to independence. In total, 56 men signed this document. And in the signing, in the signing of the document, every single one of them knew that in signing their name, they were also signing their own death warrant. And in the years following the signing of this Declaration of Independence, 5 of the 56 men were captured by the British as traitors and were tortured before they died. 12 of the men had lost their homes, had them ransacked and burned. 2 of the men lost their sons serving in the Revolutionary War, and another lost 2 sons in the Revolutionary War. 9 of the 56 fought and died from the wounds or hardships of the Revolutionary War. This was a costly document to these men. This they knew could cost them everything were they to sign this document. They lived after that for about another 10 years under what was called the Articles of Confederation. And the colonists decided, because that wasn't working out too well, the colonists decided that a new form of government was going to be required. And so each state sent delegates to a constitutional convention in Philadelphia. And after months of debate, they agreed on September the 17th, 1787, to the present Constitution, the one that we live under right now, which was ratified by the individual states during the remainder of 1787 and 1788. And then it was instituted as the supreme law of the land in 1789. And for 233 years, the Constitution has another of our founding documents. The Constitution has served as the legal foundation for how the institutions of government in the United States are going to be run, how they are going to function. 233 years, that is the longest in the history of the world for a document to be issued and then lived by for 233 years. Our founders initially set up the government of the United States of America, and this is important, I think. They initially set it up as a constitutional republic, not a democracy. I don't know if you've noticed this, but oftentimes, even our politicians, commentators on television, talk about our democracy. We don't have a democracy. We have a constitutional republic. In our service today, I'm going to show a video from Prager University about the difference between a constitutional republic and a democracy, and what is being fought in our nation today. There's a battle being fought essentially to make us a democracy and not a republic. And our founders, these brilliant men who sat down in Philadelphia during the summer of 1776, and then again sat down in Philadelphia in 1787 to work this out. They rejected our being a democracy because they feared the democracy in the sense that the majority would overpower the minority. And so they created a constitutional republic. Now, I know that there are people, and maybe some listening to me right now, who think, this isn't important. But I think it is important. I think it's important that we be loyal to our country of birth, that we seek its good. Just as Jeremiah told the captives of Israel as they went into Babylonian captivity, you go there, you live your life there, you raise your families there, you build your homes there, you work for the good of that country while you are there. I think that is an important mindset for us to have as Americans today. We need to work for the good of our country. And when there are elements in our country, and you know as well as I do that there are elements in our country that seek right now to tear it to pieces and tear it to the ground and then build it back up in the image that they want. What they want is not what our founders wanted. It's not what we have had for the last 246 years as the United States of America. People say, well, countries aren't that important. I disagree. I think countries are very important. And if you go to the Word of God, you'll find that God approves of nations. As a matter of fact, Paul told us in Acts chapter 17 and verse number 26 that God determined the boundaries of nations. From ancient times, the nations of the world have had defendable borders. You knew when, even from ancient times, you knew when you went from one country to another country. There were lines of demarcation, there were borders. And not only that, God is also interested in the history of nations, often referring to a nation's history, particularly in relation to Israel. The Old Testament is filled with stories of building Israel into a nation, Israel particularly. And it's filled with reminders to Israel concerning their history, good or bad. You look at the Old Testament, and a large portion of the Old Testament is about the history of Israel. God wanted them to know their history. He wanted them to know the history of their country and how their country was run when it was blessed and how it was run when it was cursed. God wanted people to know that. There are great spiritual lessons, I think, to be gained in the history of a country. It's valuable things to be learned by the people of that nation. It's true for us. As an American, it's very troubling to me how totally disinterested so many are in the history of our country. I saw the other day, I don't know who it was I was listening to, but I saw a prominent person, I can't recall his name, but he was teaching at Columbia University. He was just a visiting spokesperson, as I recall the story. And he went into a classroom. I don't know how many were in the classroom. It must have been rather large. It was the class of seniors who had majored in American history. And this man said, the first question I asked them when I stepped up to the podium was, how many of you know who George Marshall is? Now keep in mind that this is the graduating class of one of our major universities. And this visiting professor said not one person in that class knew who George Marshall was. Maybe you don't know who George Marshall was. But certainly, someone who has studied American history in a major university ought to at least know who George Marshall is, since it's less than 70 or 80 years since he was prominent in our nation. But they didn't know. That's sad to me. And what's even sadder is that so many have no interest in how our country started. They have no interest in why it started. They have no interest in what it took to get it started. They have no interest in the cost to the individuals who started it. And and certainly they have no interest in what it might cost them personally to keep it going. They're just not interested. And what scares me about the future of our country is that so many people are disconnected from it. There's no pride in many people's minds about being an American, about our country. I think the Israelis ought to have the same pride in their country. The Canadians, the same pride in their country. The Mexicans, the same pride in their country. But we're Americans. And there ought to be a sense of pride and appreciation and connection to our country. The reason for that, in my view, is that our history as a people is what we have in common. It is what binds us together, especially in a nation like ours where we are a mixture of ethnicities and a mixture of people groups from all over the world. This is why attempts to divide us, and there are massive attempts to divide us over things like ethnicity and race and sex and educational degrees and status. Why these things are so dangerous for our future. And I wanted to talk about this today because we're kind of thinking about our nation. We're thinking about our history. It's a good time to remind us as believers in Christ that there's nothing wrong with pride of country. We ought to be proud of it. This is what God gave us. This is where God placed us. And if we do not know our history, as someone said, then we're bound to repeat it. And if we do not know our history, we have no context for the living of our life right now. And we give to others the opportunity to rewrite our history, and that is going on right now. We give over to other people because we have no connection with our history, with what took place in our country previously, good or bad. And there's enough of both. But if we have no connection, we're never going to learn from what our country has gone through. We're never going to learn today about what they overcame before we ever got here. You see, the thing that bothers me with so many people about history, and a lot of people don't like history, and I understand that, but history is important to us. And what bothers me about this is that so many think history started on the day they were born, and there was nothing that really took place of any importance previous to that. That is a very self-centered view of history and of your country. America has been blessed. Not because perfect men and women have lived through it, but because those people have, for the most part, lived out a Judeo-Christian ethic in our country. Not perfectly, but they have lived that out, and God has blessed us abundantly. And if we don't know what they did or what they went through or what they overcame, we're going to repeat it, and we're going to give other people the opportunity to rewrite our history, to set their own national objectives, and to fix those things in our mind without any context about what has happened previous to this. And they're going to set up in our minds things that were never a part of the original design and the original vision of the founders. and by which our country has thrived for nearly 250 years. And the rewriting of that history of the American people has been going on for over 100 years, when the progressives at the turn of the 1900s began to come to dominance. You know, I listen to the news, I read things, and to hear some people tell it, America is not the best of nations, it is the worst of nations. This is the worst government system that has ever been set up on the face of the earth, to hear some tell it. I am an American, and I am proud of that. I am a Christian American. And I understand that our country is not perfect. It's not perfect by a long shot. But for nearly 250 years, we have sought to form that more perfect union. You know, there's a reason. There is a reason why people from all over the world, people of every nationality, every race, every ethnic group, every social bracket, every educational background, there is a reason. Stop and think about this. I want to tell people sometimes when I hear them on the news or griping or something about our country and how unfair it is and all the rest of it. There is a reason why people from everywhere, from every strata of life, are risking life and limb to get into our country. Maybe they know something that we don't. Or maybe they know something that we don't appreciate. There are movements active today to tear down our institutions, to abolish rights guaranteed to us in our Constitution, and to destroy the opportunities that have given multitudes of people the opportunity and the ability to make a better life for themselves. In the mix of these anti-establishment movements, which I remember in the 1960s and 70s growing up, I remember the people marching in the streets, burning American flags, burning draft cards, and all the rest. In the mix of all of this is an undercurrent of an anti-God, particularly an anti-Christian philosophy that would have no greater joy than to shut down our basic freedoms, our freedom of speech, our freedom of press, our freedom of worship. And they offer those things or seek to achieve those things with the promise that a benevolent government, which has only our best interest at heart, would give us back something better in return. And here's my concern, among other things, but this is my concern, that should they succeed, the chances that our opportunity to preach the gospel freely and to preach without government interference would likely be lost. And this is my opinion. I believe it would be lost under the guise of hate speech. Because if you preach the gospel and you preach the Word of God as the Word of God declares, and you preach it forcefully and you preach it honestly, then it's going to be offensive. Paul talks about the offense of the gospel. It's going to be offensive to sinful men and women, and it will be deemed hate speech. That's my fear. I think that day may well be coming. I believe that America is in danger of losing the precious freedoms that have been handed to us because our true history as a nation is not known, it is not cared about. And there is no loyalty on the part of so many to the foundational principles upon which our republic rests. This saddens me. It saddens me because I love America, and I believe that God has held America in reserve in these last days as a lighthouse for the gospel. There is no aspect of our national life that has not been corrupted. There is no aspect of our history and our life as a nation that is not now under attack, from our national leadership to our legal system to our national defense and to our churches. I say that with the understanding that that is the way of human government. It is the way it has always been. So somebody listening might say, you paint a pretty negative picture. Should we give up? I don't think so. I don't think we ought to give up. Because the basic framework of our government, which in many aspects is based upon biblical principles, the basic framework is still intact. As believers, you and I should earnestly take up our responsibility to be salt and light in this culture, to be in the culture but not of the culture, to know what's going on and involve ourselves by challenging the darkness that is deepening and that is surrounding us, by challenging that with the light of the gospel, and by confronting the corruption that surrounds us in our schools, in our businesses, in our government, and everywhere else, confronting that corruption by holiness of life. We have to live credibly within the culture. And the reason we need to live a credible Christian life is so we can speak authoritatively and lovingly and credibly to that culture to which we have been sent to share the gospel. May I remind us all that Christian people were deeply involved in our beginning. Back in the Revolutionary period, there was kind of an insult hurled by the British at what they called the Black Robe Brigade. You know who the Black Robe Brigade was? It was preachers. It was preachers who stood in pulpits, and the British understood that at the heart of this revolutionary atmosphere for freedom of speech and all the rest was centered in the church. Someone asked John Adams one time, who should we thank? Who should we go to? And he listed 5 or 6 names. They were all preachers. They were all Christian ministers who, because of their study of the Word of God, understood that there is a passion in the heart of mankind for liberty, for freedom. In the abolishment of slavery. The national sin, the dark blot upon our beginning, slavery. Who was behind that? To a large degree, it was the Christian church. And how about the civil rights movement of the 1950s, 60s, 70s? Virtually every other righteous cause in American history has been helped, pushed forward by Christian people. This is a great country that God has blessed tremendously in every way. But His blessing can certainly be removed. It can be removed when we choose to remove Him from our national life and our personal life. God's blessing is promised to that nation here in Psalm 33 and verse number 12. Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord. Now, He doesn't especially pinpoint Israel, but He's certainly talking about Israel, but He didn't name Israel. He broadened it. And He said, blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord. What nation? Any nation. So what do we need to do? Well, I believe the Bible tells us. In 2 Chronicles chapter 7 and verse number 14. Let me just close this out with a couple of things that I think are important to our nation and to our liberty. First thing we need to do as God's people is assume our responsibility. In 2 Chronicles chapter 7 and verse number 14, the Bible says, if my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land. We have to start with ourselves. As believers in Christ, that's where nations make the turn toward righteousness. And then the Lord uses those individuals as powerful agents to begin turning things around. In the issue of slavery, in Great Britain, it was a man by the name of William Wilberforce, who for years, for decades, fought against slavery. He was a Christian man who stood in Parliament and gave speech after speech after speech after speech for decades, until finally that nation turned and abolished slavery. In the United States, it was Martin Luther King. And, his preaching and marching that finally woke the American people up to the evil of discrimination. The Lord uses individuals. He uses people and He puts them in place and they preach and speak. Joseph didn't wait around until Pharaoh made some political changes. He lived boldly and righteously right where he was, in a prison. And at the right time, God moved him to where He wanted him to be. Daniel, boldly determined to live according to God's word before Nebuchadnezzar had ever heard of him. And he affected the lives of people hundreds of years beyond him. And I speak of the Magi in Matthew. There are countless stories about believers like this to be found in the Bible. And God still works this way today through His people who will dare to stand for righteousness, who will dare to live holy lives, and to lift up the banner of Christ in the world. He still works through people like this. Billy Graham, for instance, and many others. We often wait for God to do something. And it never occurs to us that God may be waiting for us to make ourselves available as an instrument He can use to do something through. Why shouldn't a Christian, why shouldn't people like you and me be on school boards? Why shouldn't Christian people run for the House or the Senate in the state or nationally? Why shouldn't a believer be a president of the United States? What our nation needs is some 1 Chronicles 7:14 people who will humble themselves before God, who will pray for his forgiveness and for the nation, who will seek his face, and by that it means obey him, and who will repent of their sin. That means to turn from the life that they are living and follow Jesus Christ. And God's promise is that when he finds someone like that, he will hear, he will forgive, and he will heal. Another thing in closing that I want us to know, and that is what real freedom is. In John chapter 8 and verse number 36, Jesus, this is one of the great chapters of the Bible, by the way, and not that there are any that aren't great, but this one especially stands out. Jesus is talking to a group of Jewish people and Jewish leaders, and he's talking to them about freedom. And you know, there are scenes in the Bible that are almost comical to me. And this is one of them. It is comical in the sense of the blind perspective these people have. Jesus is talking to them, as I said, about freedom, and the Jewish leaders are offended because they said to him in verse number 33 of John chapter 8, they said to him, we are Abraham's children, and we were never in bondage to any man. That's laughable. I'm surprised that Jesus didn't double over laughing at them. They had been in bondage for 600 years. They had been in bondage to Babylon, to Persia, to Greece, and now they were in bondage to Rome. But Christ isn't talking about political bondage. He's talking about spiritual bondage. And his point is that no person is ever truly free apart from the redemptive relationship that is found in the work of Christ. That's what he's talking to them about, but they were off in some political thing, and Jesus isn't talking to them about politics. He's talking to them about a spiritual reality in their life. You cannot be free, he is saying, apart from the redemptive relationship to be found in me. And that's true today. As Americans, we've enjoyed the blessings of political freedom for a long time, ever since certainly I've been born. I'm sure that's true with you, most of you at least. But if we've not been freed from the bondage of sin, we'll never truly know what it means to be free. Christ says in this passage that it is the truth of the gospel and the work of the Son that removes us from the guilt of our sin and truly makes us free. If the Son therefore shall make you free, you will be free indeed, Jesus said. But the religious leaders didn't get it. They thought that it was their ethnic position as Jews that made them free. They were Abraham's children. And it didn't matter that Rome dominated them. That was irrelevant to them. They were comfortable in that fantasy that because of how they were born and how they were raised and their religious affiliation, they were comfortable that in that fantasy, and there is no doubt that most of them died in their sin. And so I appeal to you now as I close this message, not to content yourself with the belief that because you're a good person, or because you're a Baptist or a Lutheran or Methodist or Catholic or whatever you happen to be, or because you have been baptized, or because you go to church regularly, or you give to good causes, or you serve in some way of the human race, to convince yourself with the fantasy, and I'm talking about fantasy from the perspective of what the Word of God teaches, to comfort yourself that that kind of thing suffices for the true freedom that is found in Jesus Christ alone. Don't buy into that, because true freedom is found in a relationship with Christ. The blessed nation and the blessed person is the one that makes the Lord their trust and who follow Him. Then, Jesus said, you will be free indeed. Father, I pray that those listening might understand what you are saying in your word, and that they might embrace Christ alone. He's the only hope. He's the only assurance of true freedom. We thank you for our country. We pray for our leaders, and pray that our nation and every individual listening to me might turn their hearts toward you, turn from their sin, and follow you, that you might bless us in abundance. Once again, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. God bless you. Have a great day, and have a wonderful celebration of July the 4th.